Good evening. Thank you very much for coming to the special call meeting of the Savannah-Chatham County Board of Education on this Wednesday, June 24th, 2026. If you would all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I'll now ask for the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda as posted.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. All right, I'll accept, I'm sorry? Hold on, okay. Okay, I'll now accept a motion to approve our consent agenda. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Great, thank you. All right. Can we move it to gold floor, please? All right. Okay. Pillar 4, operational excellence and accountability.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Item number 5.01, RFP 26-35, educational materials and supplies, catalog discounts for instructional, art, media center, medical, music, theater, PE, athletics, and science annual contract. The purchasing department received 40 proposals in response to RFP 26-35, educational materials and supplies, catalogs discount for instructional, art, media center, medical, music, theater, PE, athletics, and science annual contract. The firms submitting the proposals are listed in your packet and online for public viewing. The primary intent of this request for proposal was to establish a list of vendors to provide firm fixed catalog discount rates for the as-needed purchase and delivery of various instructional, media center, medical, music and theater, PE, athletic, and science materials and supplies throughout the district. The proposals were evaluated based on company experience and qualifications, project understanding and methodology, and catalog discount proposals, catalog discount rates, terms, and conditions. Staff recommend the award be made to 32 of the vendors at an estimated annual cost of $2 million for an initial one-year period with the option to renew 4 additional one-year renewal options. The proposals submitted by 8 of the vendors that are listed in your packet in the bottom section of the note was deemed non-responsive as their technical proposals were missing significant information required by the solicitation. The funding source for these purchases will be the general fund. Thus, be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the board approve the award of RFP 26-35, educational materials and supplies catalog discounts for instructional, art, Media Center, Medical, Music, Theater, PE, Athletics, and Science annual contract to the 32 vendors listed in your packets at an estimated total cost of $2 million.
I'll accept a motion. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? There being none, all in favor? Thank you.
Item number 5.02, Power School Renewal. M26017 Power School Master Contract Renewal. This investment is for the IT and infrastructural, talent and human services, and professional learning divisions. The Power School products are used throughout the district, providing student data to staff and parents. The Power School suite of products handles the following: maintains students' attendance, grades, and demographic information, maintains training opportunities and transcript data for staff containing their courses taken, allow online access to parents of his or her students' data, and allow prospective employees access to apply for jobs online. Staff does now request renewal of these products that continue to provide value to the district at all levels, as well as providing tools for our parents and the community. These products support critical needs of the district, providing the capabilities to maintain student attendance, academic data, student grades, and provide solutions for tracking staff professional training, as well as the ability to produce valuable data for parents and the community. The financial investment for this contract is $857,355.59. The funding source, there will be multiple account lines used on these products since they will be cross-departmental. Thus be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the board approve the renewal of Power School subscriptions for a total cost of $857,355.59.
I'll accept a motion to approve. Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Dr. Brinkman.
Yeah, has Power School given districts any increased information on their ability to maintain security and not to have another massive breach of all of our students and their parents' information? I mean, have they doubled down? Is there anything in the contract with them? Yeah.
They have doubled down on their security since the breach. Now, whether or not that's in the contract, I will have to go back and check to see how that verbiage is there, written there.
I mean, it's a known entity we have to have, but like, yeah. The kid did get arrested finally, so.
Anyone else?
Young adult.
There being no more discussion, all in favor? Thank you.
Item number 5.03, fiscal year 2027 budget for all funds.
Sir, before Ms. Nathaniel reads this into record, I believe we have a presentation to cover, and the superintendent has a few words to set that up.
Thank you.
As we invite our A&M partners to the podium, I would like to just acknowledge the fact that we are coming close to culminating a very long journey of developing our budget and looking at how we shape the resources that we use to fuel the work that we do in our district. Tonight, we are bringing forward a budget proposal that is shaped by your engagement as a board, and I appreciate the amount of time you all have spent leaning in, asking questions, pushing our team to get to this point. I would also like to acknowledge our staff for their willingness to lean in, learn, adjust, and strengthen our practices. And lastly, I'd like to thank our community for offering their input that helps us better understand expectations and concerns about our fiscal resources. The budget that you will see tonight reflects both the promise of our new strategic plan and the reality of the new fiscal environment in which we are now operating. Our strategic plan will remain our compass. It will set the direction for how we move forward over the next 5 years. That destination has not and will not change. But the reality and the financial landscape around us is changing and will likely continue to change. We cannot continue to do business as usual. We will have to maintain the momentum that we have seen over the last few years, but also continue to invest in the priorities that will move our district forward. So the path ahead, starting tonight, will require courage, require focus, and require shared accountability. And we will have to learn how to become leaner, smarter, and more aligned, but not lower our expectations for our students or for ourselves. So with that said, I will invite A&M to the podium to talk about tonight's budget proposal. Again, the feedback that has been offered by the community and from you all has done a lot to get us to where we are today. And we want to continue to increase transparency and provide you insight into how we are arriving at the recommendation that we will set forward.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Thanks again for having us here. Just for a brief reintroduction, I'm Mike Potter. I'm a managing director with Alvarez & Marsal Public Sector Services. I co-lead our K-12 education group. I'm here with my colleagues, John Jenkins, who you all know fairly well from many other presentations, also welcoming my colleague Ingrid Gardner, who's going to be joining our team. She's going to be filling in where you've seen Sheena in the past. We don't have any news yet, but that's why Ingrid's here. She's starting to learn all your names and faces and learn the district while we're here. So thank you again for having us. Just real quick, just to give you a preview of what we want to cover. Dr. Watts did a really excellent introduction. We'll cover that just briefly. We'll talk about the timeline, where the budget goes now, given the adjusted timeline. And we want to spend time, per your request, we want to spend time on budget history, including a revised budget comparison, expenditure category detail, talk some about the changes to personnel that have happened over time, both the way that we pay personnel and how many personnel we have. Give you a little bit more detail on where those personal investments have been, kind of help understand and provide context to what you've seen as cost growth over the last 4 years. And then we want to talk a little bit more about the way financial management decisions have been made in the past, what we're working on in terms of doing them in the future. And then, of course, we want to go through the latest thinking on the expenditures, talk a little bit about the revenue picture and the way that that's evolved, and then share the budget recommendation to the board. So just a real quick introduction. Dr. Watts said this much more eloquently than I will be able to, but you know, from the feedback that we all received from you all, we want to make sure that you're having all the visibility that you need into the final proposed budget. We understand the cost growth over time, invest in things that support students. We want to make sure that the financial landscape that's changing and changing rapidly is well understood, and we can put the recommendations for a budget in the context to that environment. And really what we want to land on today is just as much transparency and understanding as possible. We want to present the complete budget based on all information that's available to us and frame this conversation in the long-term picture, particularly with attention to the changing revenue environment in the state of Georgia and here locally. So just as a quick refresh, primarily based on the delay of the tax digest in the last meeting that we had, the timeline for budget approval has been adjusted. So today is June 24th. We'll have budget approval. Millage hearings will then have to happen on July 8th. And then the FY27 millage adoption will happen on July 15th. At that July 15th meeting, there's a possibility to bring amendments, but the budget that's approved today will be the approved budget. And the timeline is updated, like we talked about, based on the changes, and has been validated by both district council and board council. So with that, I'd like to pass it to John to talk through a little bit of budget history to provide context for the rest of the conversation.
Good evening.
Evening.
So to start, we just wanted to take a look at the history of the revised budget over time. I'm going back to fiscal year 23. So you all have seen this slide before, but this is sort of the most current version, the latest iteration with our latest thinking on the budget. This proposed budget reflects an increase of $23 million from the prior year's revised budget. And if approved, this will be the smallest growth from a revised budget within the past 4 years at just 3.3%. So this is a growth from the 26 revised budget as of April 30th, 2026. In the past, or the last meeting, you would have seen the revised budget as of April 1st, 2026. And so we just wanted to be clear to call out that difference. So this is really, a comparison between what our most current operating budget as of today is relative to what we're proposing for the next fiscal year. The growth of $23 million it's really important to highlight that this year's budgeting processes and practices are really focusing on having a more initial budget accuracy, meaning the things that we know that we have to pay for throughout the year, we want to make sure that they're accounted for upfront. And ideally, that should mean less budget amendments throughout the year from the board and less revisions throughout the year. We also created a view that shows the budget broken out into different expenditure categories over the past few fiscal years. We really wanted to call out the growth in the top line, which is salaries and benefits. Over this period from 23 to 27, salaries and benefits have grown by about 42%. And so this is really a combination of incremental cost growth along with intentional investments into talent retention, school stability, and being competitive in the job market. We have a lot more detail just on some of those investments in an upcoming slide, but we'll get to that. In terms of the total growth from 23 to 27, salary and benefit changes corresponds to about 96% of all the growth. The delta, which is the non-personnel items, historically the district has really focused on cost control in that area in terms of non-personnel cost, and the growth for non-personnel cost is only about 7% in the same period. Are there any questions here before we jump ahead?
Ms. Campbell?
So I just wanted to clarify how we're characterizing the growth, because we're using revised budget to revised budget every other year. And now we're using the adopted, which I completely understand, but it seems like a misrepresentation of the percent growth.
So the comparisons are revised to revised, and the idea of that is to get a sense of what is our most current spending authority this year relative to what it will be next year.
But, I mean, every year, as we saw on slide 7, what we adopted, which is the budget that we said we need to fund what we need to do for every child in the district and staff, we set the millage rate accordingly, and it was for that lower number. So now we should be, in my opinion, going from the adopted budget last year to now to determine the percent growth.
I know, I understand. I think another thing to think about is the intention to capture things up front that we know we have to pay for. In the past, I think there would have been a lot more budget amendments and things like that, for example, overtime, like things like that we are trying to capture up front, which may not have been the process in the past.
I guess the reason that I'm making that point is because when we say this is the second smallest, or the actual smallest growth, to me, it's the second largest, because it's 7.7% if we use the adopted budget. And then beyond even that, we had, what's the increase over from FY23 to FY27? We've increased our overall spend $200.4 million, which is a 40% increase. So I just wanted to capture that.
And I would say, I appreciate the point, absolutely understand. The reason that we framed it this way is to put it in the context of what the district is operating in currently. And so if you think about what's tomorrow going to look like, or what's next week going to look like relative to what This week looks like that's what that increase is. I think it's a valid point to look at the actual budget authority growth over time. We can't estimate additional things that this board would want to do during the course of the year. Our goal in strengthening some of the budget practices that you won't be hearing about things like overtime that we didn't plan for because we have planned for them. But I think you have a valid point that we need to look at the whole picture, and we look at the whole picture of expenditure growth that's reflected on the next slide. And in the next slides, that should be comprehensive to authority, and which we see as like how many people are you allowed to hire, how much money are you permitted to spend, and what we're asking you for today is a change in that authority. But understand your perspective and definitely agree that it could be cut that way. Thank you.
Dr. Brinkman?
So I just saw it, that it really should be revised to adopted, revised to adopted, revised to adopted, and then we would have the revised of 682 to the adopted 705, because we really don't know what that 3.3% will be. Now, I'll say this, school district only spends 705. Don't have a revised, don't increase the budget, and then it will be a true 3.3% from last year's revised to this year's adopted, which could remain our revised. That isn't our norm. It's still, the 3.3 is still lower than, I just did quick math when I figured out as she was speaking that a true change from year to year using this, because we don't know what this year's revised would be, would still be 9.5 and like 3.6, and this is 3.3. That's napkin math real quick, but we're good at that on budget days. But yeah, let's keep it at the 705 and see how we can do that without having to revise. Now, granted, the governor can decide that they want to give a $2,000 raise again, and then our budget changes a ton, and then we find money to. So that's how these things change for the good. But it will be telling next year to see what our revised is from the 682 to whatever the revised is, because that would be a true number.
Ms. Campbell?
I have one more clarifying question. Why do we have on the bottom of slide 8, this figure excludes 60 million for 208 Bull Street?
It just lets us do a like-to-like comparison, because otherwise we could all really celebrate what a great job we've done cutting, millions and millions of dollars out of the budget. But because that's a transfer to capital funds,
Yes.
that's a decision the board made. Obviously, you had a lot of fund balance, you had an important capital investment to make. That allows us to do a like-to-like comparison that isn't muddied by that, because otherwise, anytime we did a big capital expenditure, we could really pat ourselves on the back for cutting the budget the next year.
Okay, and that I understand.
It leaves the general fund, so we don't see it.
Sure, but we voted to remove it from the unreserved fund balance, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't in this fund as of FY '26. I think we voted for that in December of '24, is that right? Okay, so I guess it's just confusing, because I was thinking that really changes the percentage growth or decline of how much we spent if it was actually included in here.
Yes.
The 60 million?
It would, absolutely.
Okay.
But our view is, let's not try to understate, the way that things are changing.
I
And-
appreciate that, because 60 million, the taxpayer still felt the effects of that spending.
course.
Okay, so,
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, to the question about, or to Dr. Brinkman's point about how do we stop ourselves from adding to the budget? There's 3 examples of types of things that add to the budget. There are things that are unexpected, that are mandated, or that are like emergencies, right, that add to the budget that everyone agrees to, we have to do. There are things that we didn't plan for, that we probably should have planned for, like overtime. And then there are shifts in policy that come really from this board endorsing hey, this is really important. And so as this board considers what does a 705 expenditure budget mean, you have to think about each of those categories, differently. And I think in the past, as we talked about, as early as last fall, the district has built fund balance over time, and then the board has recognized the ability to use some of that fund balance or execute some of that fund balance, which is to say, let's pay for this out of our unreserved fund balance, right? And so that's driven a lot of the growth is decisions that are made, say, hey, we can do this with fund balance. We have this important capital need. We have that sort of thing. Those decisions do always have to come to this board, right? What we've done in the budget this year is tried to be really thoughtful and proactive about everything in the operating side of the budget. But those two other categories, which is like things that are strategically important to you and emergencies, still might mean variance from that 705 with your approval.
Continue.
So we wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the growth in salaries and benefits. And so the first place we wanted to start is to look at the growth in headcount, particularly as it relates to enrollment. And so what you'll notice is that the last time that the district significantly added to the general fund headcount by about 512 positions was in the fiscal year 23 budget, so the prior administration. We really want to focus on the current administration, which is highlighted in gold for you all on your chart. So since 2023, we've seen about a 3.1% decline in students, paired with a headcount increase of about 2.2%. And so the combination of those things together means you have about like a little bit over 5% more staff per student. And so, sort of this relationship it's a tricky one, and it's something that, we have teams all around the country that look at, and it's very common that we see districts struggle with this problem. In some other districts, it can be a little bit more extreme, and I'm sure Mike has a million examples of different places he's seen the same challenge. But it's definitely a challenge that we're aware of and other districts are facing as well. In fact, Dr. Watts has requested our team to do some preliminary benchmarking. And that exercise has really indicated that this district definitely exceeds some of your peers in many position categories. And so there's more analysis there before there's any decisions made about adjusting or realigning staffing, but that work is underway. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, while we're seeing sort of this growth in terms of headcount, the majority of expenditure cost growth is really driven by changes to per employee compensation or benefits. And we have another slide that I'm going to jump to kind of go into detail on that a little bit. So there's a lot on this slide, so we can take it slow. But to start, the first 4 rows, which include COLA, step increases, retirement costs, and healthcare costs, can really be seen as sort of your mandatory and baseline increases. Mandatory in that the state requires higher contributions to retirement or healthcare plans, and baseline in the sense that COLA is sort of has become part of the norm here in the district in each fiscal year. These 4 categories together really outpace some of the other categories. For example, additional positions, or maybe personnel adjustments related to grant expirations. 2 other important things to highlight on this slide are some market rate adjustments. Back in 23, there was a living wage bump, which I believe was to ensure that all staff were paid a minimum of $15 an hour. And then in 26 last year, or I guess really this current year, there were salary adjustments related to a compensation study. And so really these things are, signaling the district's desire, decision, choice to really invest into employees and be competitive in the job market. In aggregate, all these changes add, north of $200 million in personnel costs from 23 to 27. If you notice on the prior slide, the total difference is a little bit less than that. That difference is really due to personnel cost reductions, for example, closing of vacancies over the years. I know there's a lot of information on this slide, so I think it's appropriate to pause for questions here.
Ms. Grabowski.
I don't have a question, just a comment. 2 things that I think are worth just highlighting. On slide 9, the discussion about future or further analysis that is already underway to identify realignment opportunities. We've heard Dr. Watts talk about, like, she knows the work ahead of her, and I appreciate the strategic thought going into how those realignments happen versus just making a cut for cut's sake and not understanding the consequences. So I know that is probably something that some of the board may not be as comfortable with, but I just wanted to highlight that and that I think that that is a wise strategic move. And then on page 10, part of the FY27 proposal includes those step increases, and we see that they are it's twice what it was last year. And that's just an indication that we are retaining more of our talent, and that those staff are demonstrating their continued growth and experience. So those are just two of the things that I wanted to highlight in this conversation.
Those are excellent points. One thing I would add is that you're also seeing the step increases on increments against a more competitive pay plan. So you have people staying in steps longer. Retention is improving, and it's improving in many districts, right? Retention's improved, but also your evergreen salary scale adjustments mean that we now know that more people are being paid fairly, and then when they get their steps, they're in a different place on the scale, right? And so that does mean that the investment in maintaining that step program grows over time. And it contributes to the cost of living, keeping up with the cost of living. So together, 2% COLA and a step increase, those things put together, as proposed in this budget, exceed the rate of inflation for the period, right? So you should be seeing a standard of living like stabilization or a slight increase for the average employee. Now the steps hit employees differently depending on where they are. But the goal of that reflects what we've heard and seen as the will of this board to be competitive. And it really is important to note that there are relatively few FTE added during this administration, right? And those that are laid out here primarily relate to specific requirements of the QBE formula, or really thoughtful investments in things that matter on campuses that you all have thought through, discussed, et cetera. Every one of these observations on additional positions is from board materials that was brought to this board to say, we want to invest in this. And so these growth of FTE, we see incidental or accidental growth in FTE at districts very often. These are intentional additions to the FTE of the district, which is an important distinction. Now, whether you want to challenge the baseline and say, hey, do we still want to do this? Can we still do this in a changing revenue environment? That's a different question than, are we doing things intentionally? And, that's what we wanted to lay out here, is just to make sure it was clear that most of these things relate to things that we want to do for kids.
Dr. Howard Hall and then Ms. Kimball.
Yes, how are we calculating mid-year step increases based on advanced degrees? I know a lot of times some employers receive those step increases mid-year once they obtain degrees. So is there a certain percentage that we pretty much predict that we may need to use to calculate those increases? Because a lot of times administrators aren't quite sure
Right.
what staff that they have that are actually going to.
I would say we're not as close to that process. I'd like to ask Mr. Ray that question if he was here, because the mid-years. There's a process by which pay requests are made and then granted to employees. That doesn't result in a top-line budget change typically, because the salary line could be like teacher salaries that you're spending out of. And if you have 5 days of vacancy, 10 days of vacancy, that covers those step increases. So you don't see like a board amendment for every one of those. But to answer about like sort of the mechanics of how that happens, we'd want to ask someone from the talent team to answer those questions.
Campbell.
Back on slide 9, I notice it's labeled the general fund authorized FTE. How many positions are not included in that are grant funded or otherwise?
So we can send you the detail on the other grants. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but that's really easy for us to pull. We can share that. with
Okay,
you.
since we were talking about that a little bit, on and off.
And you're asking a good question, because I think one of the things that you see here, and we see in every district we work with, is that the grant funding environment has been much more generous of late. And seeing this, we do this analysis almost the first day we get to a new district to say, hey, where are the cost growth, drivers, right? And, in October, last year, we came to the Finance Advisory Committee, and I think it was October, and we said, hey, we think there are some places where this needs to get stronger. Controlling for this trend is key to the lasting sustainability of the district. What you see at the beginning of this chart is grant money making the district do things it wouldn't have otherwise done? That's ESSER funding, positions that came from temporary ESSER funding becoming part of the way that we see our baseline. And that is kind of the reason that you need to actually go back and challenge yourself and benchmark. Do we actually have the workload driver for each one of these employees? As simple example as, custodians per square foot, but there's examples for every type of student-facing employee too. And given the fact that our enrollment's changing, grant funding environment is getting tighter, you have to go a layer deeper than what we did initially, which was just to benchmark and say, hey, how do we compare to peer-sized districts in Georgia or places with similar funding models? When we did that, what we saw was there are many categories where we exceed the benchmarks. There are a few districts in Georgia that are better staffed than this district. So that tells us we need to go the layer deeper to say what's the workload driver that justifies each of these positions, and then think about whether there are levers we can pull in the central office staffing approach, the school staffing model, to better align those levers with like the actual needs of students, and challenge ourselves to say, hey, did we just do that because we had grant funding for it?
And then the grant sunset, and we absorbed the
right.
positions.
And here we are telling you in this presentation, we've got a couple dozen positions that used to be funded by state or federal grants that we don't want to do a reduction in force without planning for. So we have to study those things. We can't just study those things this year. You have to study the whole workforce. And so that's kind of what you're seeing in this chart is it shows you the need for doing this, because as those two lines separate from each other, there's no revenue model that can keep up with it. And as you guys face a declining revenue growth environment, not to say your revenue is going down, but you're not going to grow like you did unprecedented growth.
Said
in
that
Georgia,
very well.
right?
Yeah, the growth is changing.
You're
yeah.
not going to grow 10% again. We know that you can't add staff the way that you've added staff before, and you need to challenge. You can't just assume that the latest person I want to add is the thing that doesn't make sense. Right? You have to say, what's the whole world of this? And look at the big categories of employees, make sure we understand the way they relate to industry standards, which are very available.
And I do want to also say thank you to Dr. Watts for making this a priority for next year, because I know benchmarking this stuff is not fun, and no one looks forward to it, but I think it's necessary now that we do it in the climate that we're in. And so the other thing I would ask for just prior to maybe the next hearing would be, I would like to see the 27 projection for enrollment and staffing, and I want to see the whole number with grant added
I think
positions.
we can give you staffing right now. The enrollment number that ends up funding us is based on like kind of a rolling perception of that starts in the fall, but I think we even have that later in the presentation, the staffing numbers.
Thank you.
And there's a couple dozen positions that we've talked about adding that add to that staffing that you'll see when we look at those numbers.
Right, okay.
So actually, here's the total number here. So you can see we're going up 0.77%.
And this is total, this is not with the non-general fund?
This is only general fund. Yeah.
Okay, so the grant position, are we, I guess, can you give me like a ballpark of how many grant positions we think we currently have, or the like that are funded externally?
You know, I would be a little bit of a guess, but I think it's
Okay.
in like 900 to 1,000 that get touched by grant funding.
Wow.
So this is the vast majority of your employees. Title I is your next biggest funding source.
But there are a significant number of employees that are not housed under this umbrella here on
Yeah,
this
many
slide.
school-based supports, and there's not very much in central office that's not general fund funded.
Sure,
So,
sure.
You know, but many school-based supports are funded by title funds, Title I, Title II, IDEA, which is,
Sure.
for special education positions. Those all fund significant investments.
Okay, thank you.
But we can easily put together a summary of this and send it to you after the.
I just would like to know a general head count for us, period, and then, where it's not 5,400 or 5,600, if it's more like 6,500, like, that would be
Yeah.
meaningful.
Yeah, we can give you a breakdown by fund too.
Okay, thank
Yep, no problem.
Question, could you go back to page 10, or slide 10? Okay, so are there other districts that are only doing steps and not doing COLAs?
That's a good question. To answer it, I would say yes, there are, but their STEP programs are different than your STEP program.
Is
Right,
there's-
right. They're more. Some districts have more. They have like a sliding scale STEP program that where the steps can continue to grow, and you can be gaining 4% by moving up a step instead of gaining 2% by moving up a step. And so in function, like how you make the decision, that can happen. But it really only changes the experience of new employees, right? Because if you're on one of those steps and you're getting an increase, that increase, has to be high enough to keep up with the competitive market. And so if you're only giving steps, let's say you were to strip back and only give the step increase here, maybe you could do that once, maybe you could do it twice, but at some point, you start losing all your most talented people to other districts. And so when they do have a system that works differently than step plus COLA, the step side of it would be much more generous, or they try to have it be much more generous.
Dr. Brinkman?
I'm going to look at the elders on the board, but there was a time where y'all had to freeze everything because of budgetary concerns, and then the district fell well below, being able to attract, right? Because individuals could live in Chatham County and drive to Bryan or Liberty or across the bridge and make much more because those districts were doing steps and COLA. So I think that Mr. Katchmar and Ms. Hall and previous board members were able to swing us back, and that's why some of those COLAs a couple of years ago were much larger, to catch up so that we can find talent. And as I don't want to misquote Mr. Katchmar, but being a top 10 of salary so that we can attract the best and maintain the best, I think, as you stated earlier, we have to start reevaluating everybody and making sure that the positions that we have added need to remain and that the workload is there. And as the super has, I think, talked to all of us, that is the next piece of the puzzle. We all want to change things quickly, and it just doesn't happen as fast. But I would hate to slide back into not having some amount of a COLA and then have to play catch up again and have to have a third party come in and do another market analysis because we've fallen off of maintaining the pace of everyone else. Yeah.
Ms. Hall, your microphone.
Intentional was the word we realized we had to put into the recipe to get things back to where they needed to be.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Thank you for your presentation so far. Quick question for you. In your observation, would you say that our practices on COLA and steps are the best to continue on, or would you say that it's good to question or examine a difference or a change?
So the labor market is constantly evolving, right? Just like your fiscal situation is evolving. So you should always be challenging your practices around things like this. If you were to look at your history of COLAs, there were years when you were doing 5% or 7%. You can't do that when your property tax base is only growing by 3.3%. And so it's reasonable to think about finding a middle space there. What we would encourage is to try to keep the plan for cost of living at pace at the very least with inflation, and then think about competitive factors in addition to that. And really what we think about is focusing on making sure you have the right number of people so you can continue to pay the ones that are great really well, which takes time. It takes infrastructure to do those things well, to encourage paying your best performers well. And overall, you want the combination of your steps, your COLA, and your performance incentives to be competitive, right? But it takes time building HR infrastructure to do performance incentives. So over time, I think you always have to reassess and adjust to make sure those three factors are working. I will say nationwide, many districts, especially districts with challenging collective bargaining agreements in other states, right? They got out over their skis in terms of overcommitting to cost of living. They agreed to contracts that are now going to really make the rest of their budget challenging. Your history does not look that aggressive. So, you're right to be thinking about it, challenging it, thinking about it. But we would just encourage constantly reassessing the competitive market and thinking about those three different levers, not just the two that we've historically used.
Ms. Campbell.
Along with Reverend Smith's point and what you just said, when it really stands out to me that the total cost, if I'm reading this right, is 217 million in personnel-related additions from FY '23 to FY '27, which is 30% of our total budget right now. So your recommendation would be to really take a, if I'm understanding correctly, to really take a look at our structure, positions, and tentatively go forward with being marketable, but also be prudent
Right.
in that this is compounding cost every year, and the more people we add, the
That's
less
right.
we can pay the ones that.
Yeah, you have to address both levers, right? I'm sure Dr. Kratz talked to you a little bit about like opportunity culture and the way programs like that work, where you can yield better results by having fewer really motivated staff. Those things are definitely worth pursuing and require infrastructure to do them. But you cannot only look at the cost per pupil, or sorry, per employee when the number of pupils is going down, right? You have to think, how do we keep the right healthy ratio of adults to students? And then how do we make sure that those adults are the best adults we can get? And that means adjusting both the number of adults and the amount of money that those adults cost. And that can, that street can go two ways.
That's a great point.
Anyone else? Continue.
So the next slide we have is to show the total headcount over time from 22 to 27, but also to give you a view of where these employees are. So in the table in the top left, we've broken out the employees into two different groups. So school-based employees, so those are folks who are based directly at school sites. This will be your teachers, nurses, custodians, et cetera. And then we have another category of employees, which are your district employees. If you look on the chart to your right, we've broken out the district employees in a couple different categories. Namely, we wanted to highlight campus police and operations because while these are district employees, these are still folks who work day-to-day with students, ensuring that they have a safe school experience. So, that would be your school safety officers for campus police, and then in operations, the biggest example of that is your bus drivers, folks who are every day, day in and day out, working directly with students, although they're technically district employees. The last category, which is highlighted in the yellow color, is all the other district employees. So that's your finance department, communications, legal, et cetera. And so we really wanted to just make sure you had this understanding of where the employees actually are in their function. And then we also have an appendix slide, if you all are interested, with a little bit more detail on some of the departments and where the employees are. Are there any questions here? If not, I will pass it back to Mike to talk more about financial management and capacity building.
Please.
Great, thanks, John. And we really would encourage you to look at that appendix slide in detail because you will find the answer to most of your questions about where are these FTE coming from. And one thing just to keep in mind as you do look at that, you'll see the Office of Academic Excellence, right? That is an office that's investing in campus supports like special education teachers, counselors, those sorts of things, has driven most of that non-operations, non-police expenditure or staffing growth. So just one other thing we wanted to make sure we cover, just as by way of example is, as we go back a couple pages, we talk a little bit about some of these additional positions. And often these additional positions are things that this board is excited about that come from a superintendent strategic plan and are really core to something, a specific need that was identified. Sometimes they are fully funded by outside sources and we're excited to have them. And then sometimes they're some mix of those things. And one thing just to keep in mind is that as we add FTE, you'll see a number of positions where you see QBE earned positions. You hear QBE earned and you go, oh, the state's paying for it. But you probably mostly know that that doesn't mean they're paying for all of it and that the district can incur costs associated with those new QB investments. So we wanted to just highlight a recent example of that to help you kind of understand that when you see that QBE earned, and we even talked about the baseline of QBE positions that are, their starting point is paying for about 67% of those. So you see a new position's QBE earned, you can count on that pushing your own cost local expenses up by a minimum of 33%. And sometimes those programs are also requiring you to do something where your operating environment might be different than a rural district's operating environment. Those costs are higher. This year, since the last time we met with you, the QBE mandated requirements, which is, of course, the district's grateful to have support for investments like this, but those mandated requirements for literacy coaches said that the district needed to add 33 FTE to schools under HB 1193 to add literacy coaches to every elementary school. This means every elementary school gets one literacy coach unless they have fewer than 200 students. And that's really exciting, good for kids. I think aligns with a lot of the things the district thinks of as strategic priorities. However, when you think about the fiscal impact of it, when you see some of the FTE that are being added over time that are driving some of the local district costs, some of them are driven by situations like this. And so we wanted to spell this example out where you have your total QBE funding. The state has estimated it'll cost you $1.8 million. They've said the local share of carrying that $1.8 million based on your local mills that are required is $684,000. So that means that state support is less than $1.2 million. Applying those coaches in our labor environment to get someone with 5 years of experience and a certification means that their total per FTE cost is quite a bit higher than what the state has contemplated. When you have it fully loaded for all of the benefits, we staff those as a step 6 or a level 4 step 6 to meet that experience requirement. In doing that, we incur $3.6 million worth of expenditures. Those $3.6 million are supported by the state, but it functionally supports like less than like 40% of that. And so the district ends up with $2.4 million of net new costs, which are, again, I don't think anyone is going to say you don't want literacy coaches. But those are things that the district has to sort of support because they're in the QBE formula. And so when we talk about positions, we talk about ads, lots of these things are really good for kids. Lots of them have more local cost in our district than the state contemplates because we want to pay those competitive wages that you all have made a priority. So it's just important as an example to understand that back when we see these QBE mandated, you see 14 QBE earned, 39 QBE earned, 22 QBE earned, that those state level decisions have impact on the local side of the budget. Any questions about that example?
Dr.
Yeah.
Dr. Brennan.
I'll just make the point that all 34 of them are not going to come in at step 5, and some of them are going to come in at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and it's going to cost more. and again, nobody's going to complain. We need them, but thank you for taking the time to actually flesh out that whenever we do get money from the state, a third of it goes right back to the state for us to play in their coffers. And then they add criteria that aren't accounted for in the salaries.
Yeah, the way to think about it is it's a partially funded mandate, right? It's not a fully unfunded mandate. You do get those, but this example, there's a lot of volume in partially funded mandates that is the responsibility of the local taxpayers, which is makes it hard to plan for. So just kind of going back to like where we are right now in our budget process and where this administration is, I should say, is kind of on the left side here. You know, the new administration was working with an old budget in FY24, just getting its bearings, operating with some support from some COVID era funding programs, and not understanding some of the constraints in financial management planning capacity that we've been working on more recently. And then in fiscal 25, the district has worked on recognizing those constraints and making incremental improvement. And then, Dr. Watts asked for outside support to understand what those limitations were and where they could strengthen. We've provided some of that support starting last year and into this year. And then the district also importantly recognized pay equity issues that were causing challenges and invested in addressing those. During this fiscal year, we provided assessment results, to the board, to the Finance Advisory Committee, and to the leadership team. The district's been working on strengthening financial management capacity, focused primarily on forecasting, on the budget process, and other improvements to key employee-related processes, strengthening the capabilities of the Munis system. They've closed out many, many open issues that were causing challenges in Munis. While there is more work ahead of us, there's been good progress there. And then the planning around the budget process has been anchored in a multi-year financial outlook, and the district has conducted a preliminary staffing assessment for staffing levels relative to peers. As the district looks towards the future, there's a lot of hard work to do, a lot of tough decisions to make. the district looks to fiscal '27 to complete a staffing assessment and plan reductions associated with that staffing assessment, which will mean that this board is considering more difficult decisions than it has in past budget cycles. Grant-funded positions, many of which have been continued by default, will be monitored. We'll look for additional opportunities to fund them from outside supports, but they'll be evaluated against workload demand, and in some cases, many of those positions will need to be closed out because there's no revenue for them anymore. The district will continue to expand use of academic ROI. I think, starting with the big things is important, starting with big academic investments, but trying to build that muscle and extend it into other parts of the budget process, and then continue analysis of the opportunities to implement performance pay. The Human Resources team has been working on some of the capacity building needed to be able to be in a position to do that. During the last year, we've worked on department budget ownership. So the individuals that own budgets within the departments have a lot more familiarity with the details of their budgets. They feel accountable. They can answer hard questions from Dr. Watts or Dr. Taylor about their budgets. That needs to carry into the schools. And we need to have additional ownership of those types of decision-making from principals who should be empowered with information to make decisions and guide resourcing. And the district needs to continue to work there. Another thing that the capital improvement team or the operations team will be working on is integrating capital improvement planning across all the different revenue sources. So obviously, you have a lot of capital improvement planning that comes from SBLAST. There's other capital improvement planning that has to come from the operating budget, that comes from other sources. And so understanding the facilities condition assessment and really applying a more analytical lens to that is something the operations team is working on. And I think really importantly, looking at things that have been challenging but not totally understood, like the school nutrition program. We know we should probably not be subsidizing it as much as we do. We don't know totally why, and we want to understand why that's happening and look at anything else like that that stands out to try to find opportunities to serve students as well or better without uncontrolled cost growth, and then continuing to challenge the things that we've talked about as baseline. This district has made a lot of investments that exceed what other districts would make. Those are generally good things that we all like, right? Those are in the baseline. They're the way we think about what the district has to look like. As we turn to talk about the revenue, you'll understand why we need to challenge those things because they may not always be sustainable. And then in the long run, the district has to think about the really big changes, changing the way the whole district, what the district looks like. What is the building footprint of the district? How do schools flow to one another? All of those things should be focused on putting as many dollars as possible into highly effective teachers' hands in reasonable sized classrooms. And so over time, you have to challenge each of these things. So now we're building capacity. Next year, there will be more aggressive improvements that are going to mean tougher budget decisions. And then over time, that means challenging the way the whole district is organized. So we know that this budget is, reflects an ongoing conversation, ongoing progress, and we're happy to see some of the progress that's been made, but there's a lot of work ahead of us to take advantage of the capacity building that we're doing and make sure that we're ready for what the future holds from a revenue perspective.
Ms. Hall?
Could you go back just for a minute to the point we were making about the state giving us mandates that they don't pay for? I was doing some research in the Learning Policy Institute about Georgia. Is that true of most states that you have had experience with, that they pass those costs down to the local government, or is Georgia, they gave Georgia a C- in terms of its ratio of K-12 funding to the status of the economy?
So
the amount that they were willing, they gave us a C-, 35th of 50 states. And I was just wondering, is that one of the practices that earmark that?
So every state has a different funding formula approach that varies from like total local control to total state control. Total local control can feel really great if you're a high property value city and there's nothing that needs to be done to support your kids and they're low needs kids and you can have low taxes and support them really well. And right, in a total local control environment, the state's not involved at all, except as to regulate things like special education and certain academic pieces, they have very small state roles in the funding environment. Then the extreme is an environment like, a good example would be Texas, right? Where they have most of the funding is controlled by the state, comes from the state. Georgia's kind of in the middle on that continuum. Other states like Virginia do similar things where there's a local and a state match. That combination can work better than one or the other extreme because it accounts for variations in, for example, it could account for variations in cost of living, driving a higher property value district being able to pay teachers more, where if you only have, $11,000 per student in every state in the district, rural districts have advantages over city districts. So there's a lot of different formats by which that
But
can
see,
work.
I'm asking about they're mandating things and
And
not
every-
paying
yeah.
for them. That's what not paying for the things they mandate. That's the question
So-
I have.
Every state acts as a regulator, right? And in that regulatory role, they can require things of the local education agencies. And that does happen to some extent in every state. It is not every state that prescribes staffing in this way. So this is something that Georgia does that not every state does, that shares costs with local districts in matters that not every state would. I couldn't tell you what the whole strategic landscape looks like, but I think there are outliers on either side.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else? Continue.
Okay, so what we want to do is kind of zoom in. So we talked a little bit about where we're at in the process. We want to zoom in on what expenditures are looking like in the proposed budget. We've talked a little bit about this in the last slide, so I won't go into too much detail. Just want to highlight that the process improvements here include adding academic ROI-informed investments, budgeting for things like overtime, not just waiting and reacting to them, working a more intentional way to find reductions and to control cost growth, and then improving processes for identifying expenditures that are going to outpace reductions. So understanding the mandated baseline strategic. There's been early cost savings. We talked about $18 million in academic ROI-based decisions that were made. Most of the cuts that have been made to date are replaced with strategic investments and uncontrollable costs. But to give you some examples of the things that didn't make it in the budget process this year, because we were reviewing things for their impact on students, their necessity, and we're using historical analysis of things that were previously underspent or unspent. There's school beautification projects that are really nice and people are excited about that don't really serve kids as well as you might want them to. It's about $1 million worth of those. There's a number of different legal funds the district had set up that were were found to be underutilized. There were also some trainings and some other employee-facing training budgets that were, reduced. Legal services for international teachers we planned on never materialized, so the district decided not to try to plan on those expenditures again. And then where they've not been able to execute on some certain hiring incentive programs, rather than just sweeping those funds and saying, oh, we'll just use those for something else, or kind of spread the money around, remove those from the budgets, and also gone through some tougher decisions primarily around operations and police when it comes to vehicles, making sure that obviously they have what they need, but not exceeding that with buying additional vehicles. And then also we talked, I think, at the last board meeting around the reduction in emergency weather funding. There's a reserve for that. So we're not saying we're not spending that. We're just saying we're not adding to the reserve when it hasn't been called upon, and understand that that would be used in the future. And then also, based on board engagement and community engagement, there was a proposed investment in engaging with Chatham Area Transit that didn't make it through the budget process. So while we have not made anything that looks anything like an $8 million COLA or an $8 million step worth of cuts here, these things underlie the value growth, the expenditure growth being a little bit more controlled. So we've reduced those requests and cut costs where we're able to on things that do not hit personnel. There were no layoff notices this year, right? That was an intentional decision that, as I talked about previously, cannot always be the case as your enrollment declines and your revenue stabilizes and the growth of your revenue slows. The bottom line here is that the improved budget practices have gotten us to a place where investments are a little more thoughtful we can continue to work on that, but we need to strengthen the processes to reduce costs over time. But just budgeting more accurately isn't going to get us to a top-line number that goes down. A top-line number that goes down is going to have to come out of personnel budgets, and you will all have to hear a lot more about that before this administration makes decisions like that. Any questions here? So I just want to.
I do.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So we have the press here. So what you just described were cost savings.
Yes,
okay?
sir.
I do not want this to be published as shortfalls. These are not shortfalls.
Yeah, yes, sir. And a great way to say it is that we intentionally built the budget that the administration believes is needed to support students in the next fiscal year. This is part of building that budget process, like part of the process of building that budget. We didn't say, oh, we lost this much revenue and slash and burn. You do things like that, it costs in the classroom, it costs students, it costs culture, and that's not what this reflects.
Right. So once again, we do not have a $28.3 million shortfall. We have cost savings. Continue.
Yeah, thank you. And so just want to highlight the things that contribute to our cost growth. If we talked about them earlier in the context of the history, but it seems like the board has been grateful to see things presented in what we're required to do, what we've decided as part of our baseline, and what we're doing that are strategic. And so we wanted to break those out here. The mandatory cost drivers here are QBE mandated literacy coaches, drives our top line cost. There's a little bit of revenue that offsets that. That's highlighted green because it's net new from the last time that you saw us speak to the budget. Health insurance, retirement, pension costs go up incrementally. Utility cost growth has been obviously challenging. Property and casualty cost growth is that 0.7. And then the two biggest items there in the middle, the step increases for employees, which is mandatory. It's part of our sort of contract for working with our employees, plus the cost of living adjustment, which is currently projected at a 2% cost of living adjustment. Again, an intentional investment to make sure employees are rewarded and retained that slightly exceeds the rate of inflation. And then on baseline, would highlight that as grant-funded programs have expired, some of these positions have defaulted to the general fund, and that's had a $2 million impact on expenditures. And those are those things that we know, hey, we're really excited about them right now. Those programs are running today. We need to know for sure that those meet the district's strategy, and they should be evaluated against every other investment the district makes with the same lens. Because when we got them, we said, yes, thank you for this money. Of course we'll do this program. We didn't take the same lens to them that we would through the budget process, and we know we need to work on that.
Ms. Campbell?
So a question about that it just occurred to me as you said that we had, what did you cite as the cost growth because of sunset grant positions?
2 million.
2 million. So when I look back at slide 11, where, let me preface this by saying there are a lot of true unfunded mandates, like a Christmas bonus that we then have to cover. And I agree with all of that. But one thing, when I think about the, or it's not 11, I'm sorry, it's the one with the new coaches. So this right here, are we then calculating this in as 34 new FTEs?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so a thought that I had was maybe, and I don't know this to be true, nor do I know that General Assembly had the foresight to think this through, but why wouldn't we consider this to be like some of the grant-funded positions that we just absorbed into our general fund? Why wouldn't we consider these coaches, maybe those people take other positions within our district laterally, or we use the funding that the state gave us to increase salary on someone who is currently in a position within our district but qualified to be a literacy coach? Do you see what I mean? Why would we just assume beforehand that we need 34 new FTEs?
So the mandate, so that's a great question. The challenge there is, of course, the positions we're losing in other places are not certificated teachers who have 5 years of experience, right? So in terms of moving one person from one role into another, that doesn't work in this instance, but I will say that Dr. Watts and the finance team and I and all the chiefs spent a good bit of time as some of these other grants came through, moving people around through, say, hey, we had this person that was grant funded, we have a vacancy here. How can we make sure we're doing the things we're allowed to do without immediate disruption to like laying somebody off with no notice, right?
Sure.
That's one thing you have to avoid. The other thing is their programs are providing services to students, right? And so some of the programs that lost their funding, like GNETs, for example, reduced in funding, provide special education services. The district needs to have a plan that takes
Absolutely.
longer to put together than what could happen from the time we got a new award notice. And so those are all valid points. I think if you recall, do you remember when we looked at the mandated versus the QBE positions where we had positions that exceeded QBE?
Yes.
Any of those positions that exceed QBE are things that we're doing the state's not requiring us to. Those positions could be, in theory, flexibly moved into these types of positions.
Yeah, and I don't think I was insinuating or even offering that it be the folks who we absorbed
Right.
that would take the literacy positions, but now we have a larger bank of people from which to move others who maybe are
Yeah,
qualified
and that's
into the
exactly
positions.
like as you think about winding down a grant program effectively.
Right.
I will say our capacity to do that has been limited, and it's been a priority for Dr. Watts to try to address that capacity so that we know when a grant program is going to wind down. We have like a 9-month wind down. And so now we know these programs that are ending this year will have a better, that have ended, we'll run that wind down process with them, try to do the types of things that you're talking about. And the budget you see next year will reflect some combination of, we still think we really need to do this, and we've moved these people to other positions.
I think that's good and that we're challenging. I'm sort of pushing back a little bit on the unfunded or partially funded in this situation because I also worry, where are we going to find people from are they just sitting on their couch at home thinking, I really hope a literacy coaching position opens up and I'm a level 5? They're probably within our district. They're probably well-trained and ready and could be utilized in that way, and then we just need someone to fill the position they're currently in.
That becomes a challenge because in many cases, these are going to be your best literacy teachers that now in August and September will leave a classroom with 25 kids in it without a teacher. And the challenge becomes is how do you then fill that vacancy? Because there's no really awesome teacher sitting at home
Sure.
in September waiting for us to call them to come and work in our school district.
But hopefully that teacher would then apply their excellent literacy teaching skills, which is the purpose of the coach, right, to the rest of that school then,
strengthen
if
the
they
other
were,
teachers,
to
right,
strengthen
yeah.
them and then to create that.
You still got to find a person to go into that vacancy.
Totally agree. I guess I'm kind of pushing back on the thinking that we always add, whether it be our choice or a state-funded, underfunded, unfunded, whatever
Yeah.
it is, mandate, that we just instantly assume that's an extra 34 FTE, that we don't then reevaluate.
Let me clarify one thing. There are two different types of situations happening here. One where our management of grant program, which it has led to, we are in a place where, of course, we don't want to be, where we find out too late in the game that we lost funding and we don't have a mandate, right? Some are those are the worst ones, right? These ones that are actually in the QBE formula, they increase the headcount we're required to carry to support our schools,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
And so we have to take a different tact with each of those, and they both require very careful management. The grant funding side of it is really careful financial management and planning to make sure we either place people out, we reduce our force based on it. The QBE funding is much more in the realm of like, how do we, invest in academics without like basically cutting off our nose to spite our teeth, in order to spite our face in order to meet the 33 or 34 positions. And I couldn't tell you how much goes into that. I'm sure Dr. Watts could.
Ms. Hall?
I've been thinking about some of our retired educators, principals and all, and I have been wondering, we wouldn't have to pay benefits and that kind of thing? Is there any charm we could use to bring some of those persons, as the coaches, not as, I worry about us losing teachers in that classroom to being coaches. And it makes sense. I'm brilliant here. Let me help make 10 other people brilliant. You know, I like the whole coaching idea, but I do worry that we're going to become deficit in our responsibilities to our kids. Yeah, when we have those.
Kids won't have teachers. That does concern me. Certainly, we can look at our retirement staff as viable options for some of these coaching positions. So the answer is yes, we could
And
do
not that you
that.
do it for this reason, but you can save some money by doing that.
There you go.
Convinced to
Okay,
come back.
Dr. Howard Hall.
Totally different question. Are we categorizing the cost of fuel under the mandatory expenses of utility costs?
Yeah,
The cost
that's
of
correct. Yeah.
gas and
Yeah.
all that goes under utility?
Right, but we know that as that situation evolves, we could bring you an amendment either direction. Because, you know, if the war resolves, you know, things go the other way, we want to bring you an amendment. If you're paying $1.80 at the pump, you'll get an amendment that way. If you're paying $6 at the pump, you'll see an amendment the other way. That's one we can't do perfectly.
Hard to predict.
One more comment on the unfunded mandates. Some of these, what we call unfunded mandates, cost us more not because of the way they're written, but the way that we apply them.
Yes, sir.
For instance, we have had a policy, as long as I've been listening to this board, we've had this policy that if the governor gives teachers a raise or teachers a bonus, everybody gets a bonus. You know, that is fiscally, I don't know how you do that. How do you continue?
The other one that stands out that's similar is the way that we match benefit costs for people that are not QBE mandated, right? That's very costly, and so as those things change, you know, you should think about those things in terms of challenging your baseline.
Dr. Brinkman?
Yeah, so as long as I sit in this seat, I will always support that we will give the same amount of money to a state-supported teacher as a local supported teacher. We cannot have two kindergarten teachers teaching across, one being a QBE that gets the governor's $2,000 and one being a Chatham County fully funded across the hall and not get the money. So I am 110% committed to that being my vote always, to support teachers, making sure that we do not create two classes of citizen within our school buildings.
David, I'm sorry. Let me clarify that. What I was talking about was not, no, if the governor gives a bonus to QBE teachers, all teachers get it. I am 100% with that. What we've been doing, we've been saying, it's not only the teachers, everybody, every employee gets a bonus. So that's what's untenable.
I don't, you're saying if the state gives teachers stuff, that we make sure the custodians get it too?
That's what we've been doing.
Yes, that's what we do.
That's what we've been
Our
doing.
custodians, our counselors, our bus drivers, we do because
Well, we
they're
can see.
part of our staff
we
and
can
they
see,
support teachers.
Dr. Watts, if the cost of that is easier than the cost of mayhem when we start doing the other way, and Sean gets $1 more than I get, and, you know, I turn the school upside down. So those are judgment calls you have to really think through.
I think those are all great points. I think where we're going to talk about in the revenue is going to help you understand why we need to make sure we're actually analyzing that and knowing what that is, even if we end up on the same decision, because the trade-offs are going to be harder.
What is the common practice on other districts for that?
You know, I don't have a lot of parallels. I'd say the districts I've worked with have a mix of either really prioritizing certificated educators or doing it for everyone. And there's not a lot that really take the precision of it to any distinction other than those two options. But again, I don't have as many pure Georgia districts who you guys have to make these decisions more often because the state does seem to make decisions like this for you. Right. So, Jumping back to expenditures, if you're ready, if there's no more questions?
Yes.
So the other things here, right, so the strategic plan investments are the things that align with Dr. Watts' strategic plan that are additive, academic focused in nature. The one thing I'll note is that based on the feedback from the board, we had initially, when we realized our revenue picture was getting more challenging, we initially made some curtailments to some of the less student-facing. But I think we heard the board loud and clear that the data dashboard that provides transparency to the board is still a real priority. And so the budget request that you see today reflects that being included, where previously we'd been considering that as a way to adjust to declining revenue growth. Any questions on these expenditure items?
Ms. Grabowski?
To that point, there were a number, I think there were like 5 items that were on that slide. So where are the, and I don't even remember what they are, and I don't have that presentation with me. Like, was higher,
That was a COLA, it was Chatham Area Transit.
Okay, so those were-
It was the pilot transportation program. Oh my
so is
goodness.
pilot transportation still in the budget?
It is still in the budget
Okay.
as of today,
Okay.
but
And now that is, I hate to say this.
that is
That
another
is-
nice to have.
Well,
That's-
no, that's not dependent on us.
Well, and some of that is dependent on the participation.
Some of that is dependent on participation,
Right.
and some of that is dependent on CAT. And we know where CAT is.
Not the pilot transportation.
Okay.
No, not the
But-
pilot
but
transportation,
we
that's
have-
us.
But
I
we
just
did-
wanted to
we did
understand,
have a program with CAT.
right, and that's been removed because that was
Yes,
in the
ma'am.
previous slide.
Some
So I
of
just
what
wanted
was
to
on that chart also included some additional community engagement support. We did not totally end that. We reduced
Right.
Okay.
what that department was asking for, so
Okay.
they won't get everything that it was asking for. I'm trying to remember.
Those-
the
Yeah,
size.
the shuttle,
Probably knows them off
the
the
shuttle
top of his head.
program for Garrison and Charles Ellis
Right.
is separate of CAT.
Yes,
Right,
they're
no, I
two
know.
separate
I know.
things.
And
Yes.
the shuttle program, we ran a pilot and we're ready to launch it, and that is included in this budget.
Yes.
Right, okay,
Today.
right,
As of today,
okay. Thank you.
in this recommendation.
Yes, sir.
So we just want to highlight, sort of as an ending point to where the expenditures are and what we spend them on before we talk about revenues. This summarizes, based on the way we saw it prior, where these expenditures are. As you can see, 593 million, almost, all but 110 of it goes directly to salaries and benefits. Most of these other investment areas are fairly stable. And so this results in really just seeing the academic investments that we've talked about, the personnel investments and growth, resulting in a $704.7 million estimated expenditure budget or requested expenditure budget, which compared to where we sit today is a 3.3% increase. And that is primarily investing in people, as we talked about, maintaining the baseline student experience as it's been defined. Now we know we need to redefine that. And then supporting the strategic investments that align with Dr. Watts' plan. So just kind of in summary, Dr. Watts, you want to speak to the expenditure budget?
Hit most of the things. You all asked me in October when this journey started to bring you a budget that we needed to operate effectively and one that would also fuel or catalyze the improvements we needed to make in the district. And I want to assure you that that process took place. It took place with fidelity. Things that we needed to sunset have been sunset. Things that I felt would catalyze and fuel the next strategic plan have been added. We have maintained to the extent possible the baseline experience that we have all grown accustomed to. And obviously, we have to adhere to what is mandated by the state, have no choice in doing that. The budget that I am bringing you today is one that I believe in. It's one that I'm confident in, and it's one that I feel like will help us reach the operational and the academic excellence that I think will be needed in the next school year. I want to say our employee investment is an important one, not to say that we can continue to do that, but the COLA adjustment and the STEP adjustments do help us maintain a really strong workforce. We do need to look at headcount, but I believe in what we are doing to maintain our employees in terms of compensation. And they are also feeling the squeeze of an economic environment. They're going, personally, their homes are also experiencing higher grocery bills and higher gas bills. And so I want to make sure that part gets highlighted. We do have a new strategic plan that I am excited about, and I do not want this budget fiscal reality to take the excitement away. I don't want it to diminish what people think we are able to do. So there is a $10.2 million ask in that area. I have been very thoughtful about employees that have been on grants, and them finding out at the last minute that they don't have a job for next year, to me, was unfair. And I did not want to do that. So this budget also maintains funding for at least a year to bridge in any employee that was on a grant. I will not guarantee that moving forward, but this buys us a year to figure out what to do with those employees. So I believe with an expenditure increase of about 3.3%, you are getting a budget that I believe in, that I believe I can operate in successfully next year. And my ask is for your support.
Okay. Any other comments? Oh, good, you're about to get to revenues.
Yes,
That's
sir.
like, that's
Yeah, it's
exactly
hard to
where I
talk
was
about
going.
only the
Thank you very
expenditure
much.
side. And we'll kind of end on closing thoughts from Dr. Watts after we bring it all together as well. So, you know, we want to bring the board up to speed on what's happening with the changing revenue picture of the district. When we first started working here, and particularly in the fall last year, we sort of recognized the changing environment and understood that there were some risks to the ability of the district to continue growing revenue. The district grew revenue something like 9% per year for years, which is an amazing period of economic growth. But that has, you know, changed, and many factors are changing. And so just to kind of give you a picture of what the, you know, revenue growth, you know, that the way that revenue growth is changing over time, I want to highlight these factors that impact revenue. And I will, again, Ms. Campbell, a really important point here is that we're not saying that we're losing revenue. We will have slightly more revenue than we had last year, but it's very slight relative to what we've had the last couple of years. So we're going to talk about factors that reduce the growth in that revenue. The first is QBE per unit growth. The legislature has recently been more generous than they are this year, going from $50 per student last year to $10 per student this year. That means that the district, you know, if we had the same QBE unit cost growth coming from the state, that would increase funding by $1.4 million. But at the rate that we're at, we lose out on some of that growth that's been kind of consistent in the COVID era. Enrollment loss has obviously driven a good bit of state funding. The decline in enrollment from 34,867 to 34,217 means that we've lost about $4.7 million in revenue. Obviously, the district needs to build itself to serve the number of students that we serve, that rather than the number of students we used to serve. There's work to be done there. Really important to highlight, the next two are related but distinct. The revenue, the tax digest in recent years has grown, and we can talk about the history of 10% tax digest growth. That's reflected in economic boom, property value boom in the region, which is significantly slowed. So the tax digest growth slowed from 7% in the last year to 5% prior to the impact of HB 782. The impact of HB 782, which removes the CPI-linked inflation homestead growth, is really a successful tax reform effort, right, which locks homes that are eligible into 2025 base values and says that they're not going to grow at inflation, they're not going to grow at all. So if you stay in your home, you don't make major renovations to it, you have a fixed tax base for those homes which are eligible. And so that has actually basically created a credit that's removed $8.7 million of revenue that we would have had if not for HB 782. So when we see the tax base that our millage is applied to, it's impacted by both the slowing revenue growth and the impact of HB 782. As we talked about, we've had a number of grant reductions. Some of them we've had to add positions to the general fund from. Others, we simply lost a revenue source for. And then there's also reduction in payment in lieu of tax programs. So there are programs which are basically like economic incentives where a development might pay a different fixed amount that is negotiated with the local government that then somehow changes the way that they pay taxes to all entities. And so the payments that we receive from those have reduced slightly to the tune of $1 million. So collectively, if you just took all of these things and all of the things were equal to what they were this time last year, you could be looking at $28.2 million more than you are today. So we are still growing in our revenue, and we're doing that with a slightly declining enrollment, right? But we're not growing in our revenue like we used to. And so we think
Before you go any further,
yes, sir.
I need you to say it one more time.
Yes, our revenue is growing.
This is not a shortfall.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Our revenue is growing. It's not growing as fast as it used to, and the district has to make plans for a future that adjusts to that.
And it's not keeping up with the cost of running the district. It's
As
growing,
the district
but
is
not
currently
at
organized.
the
Yes,
rate
ma'am.
to keep up with the
Yeah.
cost of running the district.
Yes, ma'am. So just to highlight that impact of HB 782, because it is an important factor, and I think it's important to understand what's happening. The HB 782, we've sort of laid out two examples of how this works for a homestead and eligible homeowner, and then how it works for how it impacts our tax digest. So the example on the left here is just a one-year example of what might happen to a home that was purchased in 2025. They have a 2025 base value of $300,000. The value grows by 6%. The inflation cap growth would have said, maybe you could only grow by 3%. Under the old tax law regimen, that would be the taxable value growth, would be that whatever the CPI is in that given year. Under HB 782, that $9,000 in value growth, or that 3% that is below CPI or within CPI, is no longer growing as a taxable base. So for an individual homeowner who's eligible, and I imagine many of you got your statements in the last couple days, right? You'll see a new credit, and that credit could be, in this instance, $156 that you're not paying. That adds up together, and the way that we see it in the tax digest for the district is that we had value growth of $1.1 billion, which you can see on the right, but almost half of that is offset by the exemption, right? So when you see residential values go up by 1.1, basically any of them that are homeowners that are eligible for the tax exemption that predated this now can't go up at all, right? And so we see it's a great experience for a homeowner, but as a district, we need to plan for that reality, right? So that $0.5 billion means at the current millage rate, the district loses $8.7 million of revenue from that exemption. So these things are changing over time. There are other tax reforms that are being discussed that may put similar curtailments on other types of properties. So as the district looks into the future, you have to think about how do we navigate this? How do we change to fit the new revenue environment without sacrificing the experience that students have? Any questions on this example?
So thank you for sharing that, and I feel like we're going to have a continued conversation around this to make this clearer, because when this was first sold to me, and I supported it from this seat, I was told I would pay and that anybody would pay the same rate they paid in 2025, that they wouldn't have a chance to pay less. And now there are ways that these stackable exemptions might actually lead to somebody paying less than they paid last year to the school district. And that's not how it was proposed to me. It's not how I supported it. And I don't think voters went to the polls in November thinking that we would actually reduce the amount somebody had paid to the school district in 2025 without a change to the millage.
And that's, it's a good point, Dr. Bringman. There's some question of the interpretation of the way that these tax credits are being applied towards each other that I think is still to be better understood by the district. What we know now is what the county tells us, which is that that's $500 million, yes, which, based on our interpretation of the law as it was written, a much higher impact than we expected. We didn't expect to be talking about this kind of impact this year. So I think there's more work to be done to understand how it's being interpreted. And I think individual tax bills are the best way to understand it. because it's interesting to understand what happens over time with that, if your house value keeps growing. And so you obviously understand the issue.
Well, I mean, I'm having smarter people explaining it to me,
Right.
but it appears that with with the Stevens Day and with 782 stacking on each other, which is the way it's being interpreted currently as of 8:05 today, in 10 years from now, if somebody's home continued to increase in value, they could get to a point that they wouldn't pay any taxes to the school district with the amount of exemptions that might stack.
Which could be devastating.
Yes.
And
And again, that was not how it was sold, I believe, to the voter.
yeah, I can't speak to that because I haven't seen, I'm not a Savannah County property owner, so I don't have a tax bill to look at, but I think it's important to understand how that's working, and I know the team here is looking at it and trying to understand that impact over time, because while it's a lot right now, if it goes the way that it's been explained to you, it would really change the dynamics of funding public education. So thanks for bringing that point up. Just to quickly highlight the other piece here. So the net digest that you have had has had some incredible growth, right? I mean, fiscal 23, right, as an example, 15.8% taxable value growth. That is an incredible amount of growth. In years of incredible growth, obviously the district has invested in new things and cut to the tax rate. Over time, you can see in fiscal 26, that's calmed a bit. And now in fiscal 27, with it calming from 7% to 5% and then taking into account the new exemption, the taxable digest brings you to a 3.3% increase, which when you take that against like a COLA, which is a coincidence, but when you take that against a COLA and a step increase, makes it very challenging to continue to fund operations in a static state without changing the way the district is organized. Slower tax growth digest is, slower tax growth is going to be happening nationwide because you had a boom, things are slowing down fast, and that impact is going to be something the district needs to adjust to. This is the lowest growth in value in 10 years. Over the last 5 years, you've had a 10% average value growth, and even over the last 10, you've had a 7.7%. So there's no way to predict when you're going to have your next 2008, right? But this is going to be a significant adjustment from what this district's been used to the last several years. And there are further future curtailments in revenue that are being considered through different legislation that the district has to monitor. So the update on revenues here, and as I said, the district's built the budget that the district believes is needed to serve students, not taking that shortfall mindset. But lower than expected tax base growth, increased exemptions, and some of those expiring grants have reduced the revenue for fiscal 27, which means that the growth of what we can spend, or what we have available to spend, is going to be constrained relative to the recent future. This changing revenue picture means the district's going to have to make adjustments in the long run and consider approaches that it hasn't considered in recent years. From that, we want to move to our recommendation to bring those two sides together, unless there's more questions on revenues.
I have a comment. Earlier today, the superintendent spoke to us about having to make changes in our safety platform. I am opposed to that, and you're saying in the long term we need to look, but I think that's something in the very short term that we need to look at. Having been on the board for so long, I remember the uproar that we did not have the safety procedures in place that Chatham County residents wanted. So we made a big effort to make sure that everything there was in place. I do not think this is the time to dismantle that. So I do hope that that discussion will continue, because as far as I'm concerned, that needs to be reinstated.
Ms. Campbell?
Are we going to talk about the appendix at all, or?
Yeah, we can. So we provided a couple appendix to facilitate discussion that we might have at the end of the recommendation. You're talking about the sensitivity analysis on COLA and, is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, the school-based versus district employees.
Oh, sure.
For one.
Yeah, we can. That's, That's a supplement to the slide in the main part of the deck. I think it's slide 11 to get more detail. Is it this one here, slide 30?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is it. Okay, so I guess one thing I wanted to ask about here is, we determined that operations was mostly bus drivers, is that correct?
Custodians.
And custodians, okay. So 11% decrease, but since FY '23, or '22 actually, until now, we've seen in some of the maybe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the highest salaried positions, we've increased by 190 positions.
So the positions you're referencing is in, are you talking about other district employees going up by 190?
Yeah, so strategy, innovation, and performance by 19.
Yeah.
School leadership by 41, 111, and instructional excellence.
So I can speak to instructional excellence in some level of detail. That's the biggest driver of both headcount and cost. Most of those positions are actually student-facing. So while they report to a department, you're talking about things like special education specialists and interventionists. I think 110, is it 110, John? And counselors that, face students. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to think of them as district staff because they don't, they don't work around here, they're out at campuses.
Sure.
The other thing to note here is that you'll see things like strategy, innovation, and performance. That didn't just create a net new thing, it brought new things together. It's a reflection of a reorganization.
That is correct. In the previous years, we didn't have an office. It was just me. So if you look at over time, we've added staff, and that also includes the Office of Accountability as well as the Assessment Office. So if you put those two offices together, that's where you get those numbers. And previously, it was just me. It wasn't an office or a department.
And the Office of Accountability and Data that now report to her, they were a part of another office. So these are not new people. They just got reallocated to her department.
But the numbers tell the story in aggregate, Ms. Campbell, that I think you're referring to, right? In aggregate, you can see there's department employees outside of ops and police, which are growing. And I think that sort of underlines the need to understand that, what the drivers are for those, what's the workload that's associated with those positions. If they're not close to students, well, many of them are. You want to understand what the workload driver is for that, how you benchmark to other districts. And as we said, as we looked at it from a preliminary perspective, we think there's an opportunity to do better there. The one other thing I would highlight is you see the timing of the additions, primarily in from fiscal 22 to 23 and 23 to 24. Those are, that is primarily the impact of ESSER funding, right? So every district we work with nationwide did this. We hired a bunch of people who do really good things that we think help kids, and we're excited to have them in those positions. And then when that funding runs out, they end up sliding into the general fund. That happened into the fiscal 24 budget, which I think was the first budget under this administration that was not totally planned by this administration. Since then, I think it's stabilized a little bit, but we still need to challenge things we did 5 or 6 years ago when we think about whether this dollar should be spent in an office or a classroom. And the administration is interested in doing that, has asked us to help them with that. And so I think we'll be able to find things that help.
And I'm happy to hear that Dr. Taylor is really overseeing a lot of some of these people, because she has done excellent work with ROI and programs and cutting costs. And I think as we move forward and the cost benefit analysis is going to be ever present, I think we really, really need to start looking at the proportionate outcomes that we get from each dollar that we spend, even though it's hard to do that in education and we hate to make it that way. I think some of these things, even if they're student facing, maybe it's now a literacy coach or,
Right, yeah.
So, something to think about.
The way we think about it is every investment you make should be weighted against the best investment you can prove helps kids.
Right, exactly.
And so during the pandemic, we would say, how can this possibly be better than high dosage tutoring? Prove it to me. And a lot of times the answer would be, there's nothing that proves that that's better than high dosage tutoring. Spend it on something that helps kids more. And I think Dr. Taylor's done good work in getting that started. You have to apply that more broadly than just academic investments.
To the 85% of our district,
Right.
Okay, great.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Hall?
If you stay on that slide.
yes, ma'am.
I'm very happy to see that the Office of Instructional Excellence has the greatest growth. To me, that's the heart of our whole strategic plan. if we want to succeed, we're going to be depending on that Office of Instructional Excellence to get us there. So I am thrilled to see that that's where we're putting our money where our mouth is, right there. We're sitting here, all these wonderful, beautiful taxpayers and property owners in this room. What we need to be remembering is that every year, those 1,000 and so kids who graduate from us, we want them to become the taxpayers and the property owners. Keep that ball rolling, and in order to do that, instructional excellence is going to be the key in their lives. So it's fine to sit back and say, oh, we're paying more taxes. But remember, taxes were paid for all of us to be sitting here in our, fine homes and properties. Education did that for us, and we have to keep that ball rolling. So I want everybody to remember that as we come to this vote.
Okay, Dr. Howard Hall.
It's not highlighted on here, and I understand why, but it's important to include compensatory programs.
That's a great point. I think you're seeing that in instructional excellence.
Because it's so
Yeah.
vague, and people need to understand the different funding sources, because that's your Title I, your Title II, your Title III,
So
your Title IV.
these are general fund positions, right?
I understand, but we tend to overlook it.
Right.
And that's a big portion of our budget.
And thankfully, those are
We
funded
just-
and
right.
mandated.
It's as we pay local tax and state, we do pay federal
Federal
taxes as well.
So I was very interested in when I was looking at revenue. But I don't see, and it's a question, are any of our properties that we can sell?
Those are still on the list to be discussed. There are several. We are monitoring those, but we want to make sure that we do that thoughtfully, because there are opportunities to partner with other organizations for early childhood, workforce development. We still have a technology department that's spread all across this district, and some people at home working because we don't have a place for them. But there are properties we will be looking to sell in the next 2 years, this
Okay.
being one of them.
Okay.
And we are finishing up the sale of Thunderbolt.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
We have sold Thunderbolt, yes.
Thank God.
Are we going to discuss the rollback or the other options, or no?
Yes, so what we want to do is just kind of get to where we're at in terms of what we recommend, talk through where the current status is, and then we'll let Dr. Watts close out and have board discussion. So combining the two sections we just talked about, the way that our team sees this situation as kind of an outside observer who's now been in the books for 9 months and understands things pretty well, the recent cost growth that we see is important to be careful and watch, obviously, given the revenue environment, but it has been driven mostly by compensation choices and mandated cost per employee with some small increases in total FTE. All of those things are worth trying to understand and challenge. The district has benefited and been able to do all these things because the district's had unprecedented economic growth. You can still see cranes everywhere, but I bet not as many as you could see 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And that growth has meant that the district has been able to both increase their expenditures and decrease the millage. Those things are not going to coexist as well in a declining revenue growth environment. The pressures on the property tax base, which are kind of equally split between slowing growth and new legislation, have curtailed revenue growth this year and look to continue to curtail growth into the future. They sort of signal an end to an era of revenues keeping pace with costs without making difficult operational changes. So even with a fixed millage rate, financial pressures would increase rapidly, because ultimately, if you're increasing compensation between 4% and 5% per year, and your revenue growth is only 3.3%, the math does not add up, right? So you have to start making more difficult decisions. The district started working on strengthening processes and practices to adjust to those changes, but there's more work to be done, and particularly in the next year, challenging some of the things that we've assumed we must do is important, and taking that 85% of the budget that has not been scrutinized as heavily into a more careful review is going to be very important. The district's going to need every possible tool to navigate the changing environment. So that's going to include things like challenging the staffing baseline, pursuing some cuts that might not be as popular with constituents, and using fund balance to support the district through efforts to restructure. As the district thinks about what the future looks like, it's been years since the district's used fund balance. There is rainy day funds, if you will. And at this point, would encourage thinking about that as an option. So the path forward here is that, the district has done some things to address the scaling back some of the ambitions to meet our fiscal realities. We reduced the proposed COLA from 3% to 2%. We've incrementally reduced some strategic investments without cutting out their ability to be effective, and removed some key planned investments that are not related to student success. We're using a stronger basis of understanding to adjust department budgets, close vacancies, but for this year, that's not enough to adjust to the changes in revenue. And so we're asking you to maintain the millage rate and rely on fund balance to support those increases, to support the investments in student success while we plan for a future that involves more difficult decisions. So what does using fund balance mean in the context of this budget? The good thing is the district has built a significant reserve. Some would say, the district's built a reserve pretty rapidly the last couple of years. And that reserve has given the district some flexibility. Based on the unfavorable revenue impacts, this budget proposes to assign $17.2 million of that unassigned fund balance, reducing the unassigned fund balance to provide one-time support to maintain operations in fiscal 27. So that unassigned fund balance, the impact of that is visualized here on the left of this slide. Basically, the bar chart is the unassigned fund balance based on planned use. So the board has approved using a number of fund balance for a number of things this year. There's planned use this year that brings that total number down to the total available down, but keeps it well above the sort of mandated board policy minimum of $120 million. And so the recommendation here is to use $17.2 million in unassigned fund balance to reduce the total fund balance to $154.2 and leave $35.2 million above the board minimum available. Couple considerations as you think about this. Modest use of fund balance is a common tool for school districts in the short term, especially amid revenue declines and other challenges. But it's really important to take the message that it's sending you. This signals a need to make bigger changes to reach a lasting structural balance. Best practices are different from different standard setting organizations. They range from below the 2-month standard you've set as a board to some are as high as 3 months of operating budget. Districts have to think about how they use those standards or apply those standards based on their operating realities. A couple things to think about when you think about using a big chunk of fund balance like this. One is you really assess your fund balance at year end and you say, how much can we operate with? The district's revenues, school district revenues typically lag expenditures. We start spending money next week, and then many of our revenues do not come in until much later in the year. So that's important to keep in mind. The other thing is that when we're in a time of economic stability, we don't have collection rate issues, right? If you were to look back at what was happening in 2008, you'd probably see collection rates drop. And so the district also has to have some of this rainy day fund available to plan for those contingencies. And so while we'd encourage using some unassigned fund balance, we think the district should be measured in using that in order to be in a place where they can plan and predict future and respond to future challenges.
Mr. Smith and Dr. Bringman and Ms. Grabowski.
I have a plethora of questions. Thank you so.
You've been
Thank
saving
you,
up.
and I'm going to be as expeditious as possible. So thank you for letting me go forward. Tell me, when we look at the $17 million that we're going into the fund balance to take out, my question is, do you have any statements or recommendations that can keep us from doing this next year? Do you have any on your mind at this moment?
I mean, I would say the best thing that I could say that relates to that would be the entirety of the FY '27 column of planned improvements should be targeting a balanced budget for next year, or a very thoughtful use of a small amount of fund balance to reach lasting sustainability. Everything that needs to be done for fiscal '27 that relates to the things we haven't challenged in the budget, particularly personnel, those are going to be the levers you have to pull in order to save them.
When we look at the fund balance where it is now, do you know how long it took for us to get to this place?
Yeah, I could give you exact numbers with more time, but it's been relatively recent since I'm looking at Paige, but really since the COVID era.
Right.
Many districts have made intentional efforts. I think that this district made both intentional efforts and then also had grant funding. That
Before COVID, they raised the millage rate for those that have been here a while.
Right.
Because we had such a low fund balance.
Right. So in 21-22, the district had an untenable fund balance, and the district has built fund balance, and then maybe built pretty aggressively the last couple of years.
I believe we had 106.7 million in 3 years alone collected in unreserved fund balance. In like maybe the last 3 years, maybe it was 23 to 25.
Within the
Does that
last
sound
3
right?
years, we've collected
107 million.
107 million, okay.
Which is a combination of a couple things. One is the districts had a hard time staffing, right? So during the peak of the COVID era funding, the district had a hard time staffing, so vacancy rates drives underspend, and then you end up with money at the end of the year. But it also has to do with estimating expenditures accurately in other areas. And sometimes, I think when there was revenue coming in from the federal government through ESSER, some of those additional funds didn't get spent. There was no provision that required you to spend those. So the district was able to build reserves from that federal support. And, right now, the district's got to a place where it has what would be considered a healthy fund balance.
Gotcha. I think one of the good things to notice is that the district in the past 4 years, we've been able to sustain or bring in such funds that when we come into a place where we need them, we have the ability to reach into them. I think that's a beautiful thing in itself, personally. But another question I wanted to ask you is this: in your observation with the current financial position of the district, will you consider our COLA as a weak, moderate, or aggressive, or overly aggressive push?
I can't say that I know the local market, competitive market.
No, I'm
that
saying, I'm talking about for us, our percent for this district to give a COLA of that amount in the mindset of our financial position. Would you say that this is moderate, weak, aggressive, or overly aggressive?
Without getting into the details of what moderate, how we define everything, to me it feels moderate. There are risks in either direction. The risk of going higher is you set yourself up for a pay scale you can't sustain. The risk of going lower is you undermine your talent. If you go too much lower, the schools will start to feel it because they'll start losing teachers, and that's the cost of going too low. You go too high, you don't get to take it back.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
you don't. If you go and say, "Oh, we're going to do a 5% this year," you can't take that back.
Exactly.
And you will not have the revenue to keep up with a big investment like that in the environment that you're facing in the future, unless people want to stand up here and vote for tax increases.
There
right?
you go.
So that's just. I think that the district's made a rational decision about making that kind of investment, but saying whether it's perfect or not is not possible from where I sit.
Right. I think I'm gonna let you go with that. So the last thing, I'm gonna let it go. You feel that the COLA is fair, and you feel that we are putting our employees as a forward-thinking process or priority.
The way I think about it is you have two different investments in your employees. Each of them is $8 million. That's $16 million total dollars. That's more than half of your, I've decided to make a strategic investment. So employees are being prioritized. Dr. Watts' strategic plan is getting $10.2 million. Employees are getting $16 million. I think the message is clear that the district's still investing its employees.
Thank you.
Dr. Brinkman, then Ms. Grabowski.
Nice segue on that, because I was using those numbers from slide 16 as well. You don't have to click back. Yeah, we've got almost 18 million right there in mandatory. So if we go, and start doing our math from last year's revised budget, that takes us right to 700 million. The proposed 705, doesn't even include all the money we need for that 20.6 of the baseline and strategic. I like that Dr. Watts and the team has put this budget forward with using fund balance to make up that gap, to say we believe in our strategic plan that we built together as a board and as a district, as teachers and as the citizens of the community, and we aren't going to just put it on the back burner to, keep the budget less. But by using that fund balance, she also is already telling herself and her staff that this is now the new line, because we can't come back and ask for another 17 million to make it up next year from fund balance. So that starts, I'm sure, already last week or the week before. Let's start working on where that money's going to come from, and some of that, this will be the year of looking at how do we look at performance, how do we look at each staffing position, where are there places that we can make moves and make efficiencies, and I think you've already put that in front of you as your goal. So I commend you for that, and I commend you for making the budget the way it is.
Ms. Grabowski?
Do you have a sense of how much of the 17.2 in fund balance could be assigned to a one-time cost versus a continual cost?
That's a good question. I think, one thing we try to be cautious of is thinking about use of fund balance and budget authority differently, right? Because the district has dollars coming in, adding to a pile of dollars, and then dollars going out, right? So you can play games and say,
Sure.
this is a one-time cost, and
Sure.
it might make your budget look lower. In fact, by the end of this meeting, we could come up with, 10 things you could say you did in fiscal '26, right? And many of them could be one-time costs. If we did that, that would be, it's not telling an honest story with the numbers. It's a very common practice, because let's say, for example, we have a hard time spending down money during the course of the year, and we think we might add to fund balance. We don't push, we don't scrutinize as hard at the end of the year as we do in this process, right? And so you can take things and say, hey, we're going to do, I'm going to point to Megan. Megan, you have a couple one-time things we could say are definitely fund balance, I'm sure, right?
Absolutely. So we have in our budget playgrounds
Right.
replacements and FF&E replacements. We could, in the future, say we're not going to fund those
Right.
items. My plea would be, we want to continuously upgrade our playgrounds and our FF&E. Our students, when you walk around, you see the worn-out
Right.
desk and
Right.
the impact it has to academic pieces. But should we have a need,
So,
we
right.
could define
And-
one time.
And so you do that, and then you go, wow, we had a small budget. And then the next year, you're using an inaccurate base to say what your budget growth needs to be, right? Because
Yeah.
you're saying, that means the next year, you're not replacing play equipment at 3 elementary schools or whatever. So I would caution against navigating it. I would think about it like the district has been entrusted with these resources from the taxpayers. There is revenue coming in that adds to the stack of resources they have available. The expenditures that go out, all of that is the authority that this body imbues the district's administration with, regardless of whether it's one time or not. And so we would try to encourage getting away from that and thinking about the whole budget, as much of the budget that's not capital improvement plan, like the Bull Street renovation. If it's not something of that scale, it should be thought of as an operating investment. So we should have maintaining roofs and elevators, right?
Right.
They're big capital expenditures, but we know we're going to have to do them. We should
Right.
plan for them, right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Like, we've talked a lot about deferred maintenance and
Right.
the increased cost that has, and so absolutely 100% agree with that. Just trying to understand, kind of the, how much of this would be, maybe a better way to think of it is, and I know it's not really fair because you can assign the dollars so many
Right.
different ways, so I'll just drop it at that.
I mean, yeah.
But just, Yeah, like trying to,
Talk about this at least
Yeah.
once a week, right? I mean,
once a week.
Right, like-
I say it just like you
Right.
yeah, like what is that continual annual cost
Right.
going to be that we're going to have to find a way
right,
to try
and
and
we want
fund?
to always like bring to the board an accurate depiction of what that annual operating cost is, because we could just bring you one-time things.
Right.
But there's always going to be a different one-time thing, and then it turns out that you're not looking at your operating budget the same way as you look at your capital budget. And the way that you guys are funded, because most of your big capital things can be funded by SBLOST, most of your budget should be scrutinized the way the operating budget should. And we should hold ourselves accountable to how does this operating budget look compared to last year's operating budget.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Howard Hall.
Thank you. Feels like I need a recess or to stand up and stretch for
I
a
know,
minute.
right?
But anyhow, I know Mr. Moss, you don't like to hear shortfalls. I know that word has been like a negative word.
I don't like the headline tomorrow morning when it says we have a shortfall.
But we did have an unexpected grant shortfall. And with the MSAP, GNETs, and the police grant. But I do appreciate Dr. Watts for being transparent. And she will say anytime that she takes the responsibility and to hold her accountable. Because as a board, she's the only person that we can hold accountable. But we have $1 million teams, we have $1 million departments, we have $1 million programs and $1 million grants. So it's time that we start having $1 million results. And I'm happy to know that in our strategic plan that we are on the move, on the way to holding everyone accountable so that we can have that maximum, the maximum increase that we need to have in holding everybody accountable with our return on investment, because we are investing millions. You know, when we look at this PowerPoint, everything is vaguely put. And Ms. Campbell, I understand a lot of questions that she has because she doesn't see the positions under the positions under the positions. But we have $1 million teams out there, so it's about time we begin to see $1 million results.
Ms. Hall?
I was very pleased with the MSAP grant as it was executed at the elementary level. We had some problems transferring it as the children got older from middle into high school, but the job that Dr. Foy did at A.B. Williams with that MSAP grant was exceptional. And I'm very sorry to see that it's going away, because I think it changed the lives of a lot of those children who came through that corridor from A.B. Williams on up to Savannah High.
Ms. Snowden?
I just want to say thank you to Dr. Watts and your team for the thought, the effort. I can see all of the energy and time that has been put into this budget, and I appreciate all that has been done so that I can make a clear decision on what's to be done. Thank you.
Ms. Campbell?
I swear this is the last thing I'm going to say. Okay. What's the timeline? What timeline should we expect for the completion of some of these staffing analysis and implementation of recommendations, et cetera, that's scheduled for FY28?
So I can't answer all of those questions because our team's not doing all of that work. Obviously, Dr. Watts' team is involved in all of those. But I think generally, most of the things that are analysis-based, we want to have done by the winter break or holiday break, so that they can be the beginning part of the fiscal year 28 budget planning process. It's likely that the district can update you on some of these things sooner than that as they continue. But I don't know the totality of it, because I'm sure Dr. Watts has other ideas than I do.
So I would say you all can expect updates. Right now, I will commit to an update in October and an update in December. That's what I'll commit to right now. I think there is, and then there'll have to be more ongoing updates in the second half of the year, because again, I want to make clear that we are talking about very sensitive personnel and salary issues. And I say with almost 100% confidence that I do not believe most of our employees understand the new fiscal reality that we are in and the choices and trade-offs that we will need to make in the next year. I do not think they understand it. I was in front of one group today, and eyeballs were this big. And so when I think about what is going to have to be done over the course of a year, it is going to also require an immense amount of communication with our employees and a lot of mindset shifts and practices that have to change. I don't think we know that. I don't think we all really fully understand what that looks like, right? Things, again, that we have become very accustomed to having, we will not be able to continue to have. And I do not think people fully recognize what that means. I don't think our community fully understands what that means. And I think people voted on something and they did not really fully understand what that meant and the impact of that. And so in addition to updates, there has got to be a very strong communication strategy so that we can adjust to a new reality. And I am committed to doing that, not just for this board, but for our community and our employees who have largely been left out of a evolving situation that is now landed in our laps. I don't think they understand. So I want to say updates to the board, yes, but communication with our employees and our community is equally important to me.
Well, along those lines, I agree with Dr. Watts that people don't understand it, but at the risk of being unpopular, I will say that the bill is doing what the bill is intended to do, which is constrain our spending. And I know that we didn't want it to this degree potentially right away, but now we're constraining our spending. And so that was sort of the reason that I asked why, because one thing about this budget that I think is good is that the superintendent wants to keep the millage rate the same, still means we collect 7 million more. The problem is that we're collecting 17.2 million out of fund balance. If we rolled it back, we add another 7 million to that. So now we have 24 million out of fund balance and still have plenty in reserves over the 2-month baseline that our policy dictates. And with that, we also are even more demonstrably committing to the cuts come next year, because now we absolutely have to, because the millage rate is rolled back to 17.049. So that's all I will say about that. And
so can I just say that we are committed to the cuts that we have to make without the full millage rollback, because we have to make cuts anyway. What you just suggested puts an even bigger burden of cuts to be made. It can be done, but there are unintended consequences to what you just suggested.
I understand your perspective, and I think that my biggest concern is that we just keep discussing these changes as future actions while simultaneously approving additional spending every single year. So that's sort of my cutoff. And I know, again, that's unpopular, but that's kind of where I fall, especially when I look and see that we have accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars in an unreserved fund balance from underspend, overcollect, et cetera, et cetera. And I know we're on the right track now. I know we're organizing our budget, but as was so well said in the PowerPoint, an organized budget does not mean better spending. So that's where I'm at.
I'd like to remind everybody that come November, we do have elections, and that hopefully from the federal government on down to the state, we'll have people in place who understand the vital importance of making sure that our children get a fully funded education so that they, again, can grow up to be the taxpayers and property owners and not just remain at the lowest level of society while the rest of us continue to prosper. So November is coming. Please keep that in mind.
All right. So thank you for all the feedback and thoughtful discussion. What we want to end on is just, the proposed budget that the administration is putting forward is before you. It's a 3.4% increase with a millage rate at 17.331 and 17.2 million in planned use of fund balance. Dr. Watts, did you have any closing thoughts?
I think we've pretty much summed it up. I am committed to making the most out of the resources that we are asking for. I'm committed to being an ongoing good steward of taxpayers' dollars while also equally balancing what we need to operate as a district. I'm excited that in addition to the work that we have to do next year, we will be bringing on a new CFO, Ms. Lisa Howell, who is anticipated to start mid-July to help guide us through next year's process, which will be a rigorous process, and one, again, of changing many practices and making significant choices and trade-offs. So with that said, I think we're ready to read the budget recommendation into our meeting.
Recommended fiscal year 2027 budget for all funds. In accordance with the law and policy, staff presents the fiscal year 2027 budget for all funds. This budget consists of 5 components: the general fund budget, general obligation debt budget, special revenue funds budget, capital projects funds budget, and other funds budget. The final budget under consideration reflects no mill increase for a total combined millage of 17.331 mills, 17.331 mills for maintenance and operations, and 0 mill for general obligation bond debt. The board does now consider the adoption of the operating budget for fiscal year 2027 as an approval exception to Board Policy DC Annual Operating Budget, since the tax digest was not previously available to adopt a millage rate. Accordingly, the operating budget adopted shall be subject to amendments as may be required to incorporate the millage rate as finally adopted. General fund budget. The fiscal year 2027 general fund budgeted expenditures and other uses totals $704,710,183. This budget will receive $476,520,489 in revenues from local revenue, $210,208,374 in state revenues, $800,000 in federal fund revenues, and a use of fund balance of $17,181,320 of fund balance. The estimated ad valorem tax millage rate for calendar year 2026 is 17.331. The ad valorem tax revenues were calculated using an estimated adjusted net maintenance and operation digest of $24,716,436,238 for calendar year 2026. General obligation debt budget. The fiscal year 2027 general obligation debt budget expenditures total $270,000. This amount is duplicated below in the debt service fund budget in the other fund section. The estimated ad valorem tax millage rate for calendar year 2026 is 0. The ad valorem tax revenues were calculated using an estimated net bond digest of $27,711,798,487 for calendar year 2026. Special revenue fund budgets. The fiscal year 2027 special revenue funds budgeted expenditures and other uses total $99,718,304. The details are in your in your packets for the budgets are included as a part of the special revenues on the table that was provided. The total $99,718,304. Other funds budgets. The fiscal year 2027 other funds budgeted expenditures total $3,644,083. The details are listed in the second table as are included as part of those other funds. Those total $3,644,083. Capital projects funds. The fiscal year 2027 capital projects funds budgeted expenditures total $181,334,491. This budget is based upon estimated costs to be incurred between July 1, 2026 and June 30th, 2027 for approved projects. Thus, be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Education adopt the following budgets. Fiscal year 2027 general fund budget for a total of $704,710,183. Fiscal year 2027 general operating debt budget for $0. Amount is duplicated in the other funds totals below. Fiscal year 2027 special revenue budgets for a total of $99,718,304. Fiscal year 2027 other funds budgets for $3,644,083, and those include the debt amount that was stated above. Fiscal year 2027 capital projects funds budget for a total of $181,334,491. And be it further resolved that the adoption of the operating budget for fiscal year 2027 includes an approved exception to Board Policy DC annual operating budget, and that this budget shall be subject to amendments as may be required.
Would you like some water?
I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Before we vote, we didn't have a section in the agenda for comments from the public. I'm going to offer that now before we vote, if there is anyone who would like to speak. And there being none. Okay. I offered it. Good job. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any more discussion? No. All right. Yes, Sean.
Hearing quiet,
Oh,
like
Lord.
I'm scared. Now I'm scared.
I know.
Let me show you the scribble on the back of my napkin. No, I'm kidding. I know. So I have a bunch of thoughts. They'll sound random, and they probably somewhat are. Number one, what we're voting on, we're going to vote on budget, and then we're going to vote on millage. But the final millage vote is going to be July 15.
Correct.
So today, and I thought it was politically clever to insert into the resolution twice, this budget may be amended as required once the millage is approved. So today, in my mind, we're setting a ceiling, and we're subject to further discussions and heartburn for Dr. Watts over the next 2 weeks. Number one. Number two, I feel like there's a perception sometimes that we're looking at this revenue growth this district has had over the last 5 years and like, oh my gosh, we've done something bad. You know, the state of Georgia, their amended budget has grown 30% from 2023 to 2026.
Good point.
Most governments that collect taxes saw astronomical tax growth, particularly 23 and 24, from the pent-up demand that was let loose from COVID. So we're not the only entity that experienced, massive unexpected revenue growth. For the last several years, I remember the dance we would do, which is how come every time we have a budget vote, here's the dollar number, but then when we look at our amended budget down the road, suddenly we find $50 or $60 million that we're just going to dump into fund balance. And a lot of that was through vacancies, holding them open. So we're tightening up that process. But we're not the only entity that's experienced massive revenue growth. And we haven't done anything wrong by it, other than I think we've been, as we all recognize, a little loose in our attention to detail and making hard decisions in some areas because the money was there and it was easier to go along. Number three, I've been a board member who's consistently voted for a millage reduction since 2021, when we were at 18.81, and now we're at 17.3. I've said this before. In 2011, when I came on the board, I used the phrase ROI, and I got a bunch of blank stares. And so it's not like I'm a spend, tax kind of person. I agree with Ms. Campbell on a lot of things she raises. I disagree a little bit on the statement, we seem to say we're going to take a harder look every year and we just vote on the same budget and don't. I feel like this year and last year we've implemented that in a much harder way. We've seen tangible results from the ROI analysis, $18 million. Bringing A&M in and listening to that presentation, it was, in my non-accounting perspective, really thoughtful and well done and holistic. And I feel like that's been money well spent on advice to the district and also education to the board and to our staff. So I'm looking at this as we have a real work in progress, and we're building the plane right now, right? This is a transition budget, and I think we've done everything but forecast how hard we've done everything except state explicitly out loud the next 2 to 3 years are going to require some very difficult decisions. I was thinking about Ms. Grabowski's question on, okay, that fund balance usage of 17.2 million, what does that equate to? If 85% of our budget is people, 17.2 million is 2.8% of our labor cost. So you're looking at, 2.5 to 3% reduction in labor costs if you want to make up just that 17.2 million. And if we're saying that's the biggest area to make reductions, that's basically what we're hearing. We're going to have to right-size the district based on reduction in enrollment, based on reduction in revenue growth, based on efficiencies. We've adopted software that doesn't require as many positions. We can consolidate positions. We can change positions, but that's not unique to this year. It's unique. It's something every public and private entity goes through every year, either incrementally or all at once. We're just turning to face that now that the economic winds are, becoming headwinds more. I think about the COLA questions, and I too question whether when you combine the COLA and the STEP, going above inflation is the right move. I've also been one of the board members who strongly advocated for paying for talent. My concern is if we reduce the COLA adjustment this year, and then we have right sizing next year, the message to staff compounds over 2 years that we're targeting staff, and maybe this isn't as good a place to work from a talent retention standpoint. So I struggle with looking at the overall numbers and wanting to roll back the millage, even partially because of the excess revenue growth. But I'm also very concerned about the rate of inflation, like Dr. Bringman, I wasn't expecting the stacked application of the CPI adjustments. I don't know what that's going to look like long-term. I don't know if that's going to be the continued interpretation. I don't know what's coming next year. So all of that being said, I told you there was rambling points there. I'm going to support this budget proposal. I'm going to support the proposed mill staying where it is, knowing that I also have 2 weeks to think some more about it, and on July 15th, maybe I don't vote the same way. Maybe I vote to reduce the millage rate as we look at these issues more. But I feel Dr. Watts and her staff has put her money where her mouth is. She has sweated the details. She has implemented programs to get us to a place where we're going to have to make hard decisions. My concern about forcing those issues now when we don't have a holistic view of where we should make the targeted cuts, I think it creates problems if we do it now. I want to be in a position where we know we have to find $17.2 million next year, just if we want to keep fund balance where it is. And that's coming from somebody who's always advocated for 3 months of fund balance. I'm willing to get closer to a little above 2. We're already forcing 17 to 18 million in savings. I want to do it smart. I want to do it holistically rather than forcing quick decisions over the next 60 days. So I see this as a bridge budget, and I'm going to support it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, there being no more discussion, all in favor? Then this is just for the budget, this is not for the millage rate. All in favor? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, again. All in favor? All in favor. Okay. All right. Yes, this is for the budget, not the millage rate, yes. Okay, thank you. All right, now we have the millage rate. No. Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
Did you vote?
Yes.
Okay, I'm okay with the budget. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Calendar year
Are you going to
20.
do the cliff notes for this one?
I don't think we can. I think we have to read it.
It's a published motion? Yeah, it is in the agenda, so she can do a cliff notes. Huh? Yes. Yes. Our attorney says you can do the cliff notes version.
Okay,
Be it resolved.
Cliff Notes, all right. Calendar year 2026, fiscal year 2027, final recommendation tax millage levy. Under Georgia law, the Board of Public Education for the City of Savannah and the County of Chatham is a recommending authority that exercises the power to cause the levying authority, the Chatham County Commission, to levy property taxes to carry out the purposes of the Board of Education. In accordance with the law and policy, it is necessary for the board to adopt the recommended calendar year 2026 millage rates for both maintenance and operations and general obligation bond indebtedness and their corresponding levies on taxable properties. Okay, how can I cut this? The calendar year 2026 millage rate used in the projection of revenues for the fiscal year 2027 budget are 17.331 mills for maintenance and operations and 0 mills for the general obligation debt, for a combined millage rate of 17.331 mills. Thus be it resolved, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, that the Board of Public Education for the City of Savannah and the County of Chatham, as provided by law, does hereby tentatively recommend to the Chatham County Commissioners and ex officio judges thereof that there be levied upon the dollar of all taxable property in Chatham County, Georgia, a general fund tax of 17.331 mills, a general obligation bond debt tax of 0 mills, and an aggregated millage rate of 17.331 mills in the year of 2026 for the support and maintenance of public education, and the staff directed to advertise such recommended millage rates as required by law.
And our attorney informed me that we need to add, as published in the agenda. Now, have a motion to accept? A motion? One?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Say no. Okay, all in favor? Okay. All opposed? Thank you very much. Okay, I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you all, and thank you everyone for coming out.
You have fun sleeping here tonight, Sean.